can touch Allah bi'ithnillah, and Allah touches us. That's it.
Sure.
There is no problem.
Sure.
And this is the same way I see Allah, I can hear Allah, Allah can touch me, no problem. I don't have an issue with that.
They believe Allah touches humans.
Who believes that?
No, who says that?
Yeah, Allah touches humans. Yes, we believe that. Look, I showed you that. Did you see the hadith, by the way?
Yeah, Allah touches humans. Humans don't touch Allah, though.
Yeah, Allah touches. Look, it says, فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الله عز وجل خلق آدم ثم مسح ظهره بيمينه. الله أكبر.
Okay, what's the ma'na here? Like a message?
الله أكبر. مسح, what do you mean, what's the ma'na? مسح means to touch. What do you talking about?
No, what's the ma'na, bro?
What do you want?
Find it.
Is the Qamusi definition?
I believe Allah touched Adam's back with his hand. With his right
Is there
hand.
any tashbih?
There's no, with the kayfiyah, no. But
In the
the same way,
ma'na, what's the tashbih ma'na?
okay, yeah, so I'm saying touch, like literally, mumasa, like not physically, but yeah, mumasa.
Not physically, then then it's not the same.
No, okay, for example, we don't know what it means to see a non-jism. Well, you believe you're going to see Allah, right?
Of course.
Okay, so the same thing applies here.
But you do tafweed somehow.
No, I do tafweed of the kayfiyah.
Of the tafsir.
Yeah, exactly. But I do believe in the
tafsir.
ma'na. I do believe it. I believe it's a real event that took place. Allah.
That is exactly what tafweed is, bro.
No, it's not the same because the Ash'ari is not. The Ash'ari denies the event. No, but the Ash'ari denies the event and he denies that Allah touched Adam with his hand. He denies that. He believes it's a parable.
Hanabila tafweed is what you just said right there.
Okay, fine. If that's Hanbali tafweed, I'm a Hanbali tafweed. I do Hanbali tafweed. But the reality is, I'm telling you. Okay, but you believe Allah touched Adam? Do you believe Allah touched Adam?
Yeah, in a manner that befits.
In a manner that befits Allah. Thank you. Barakallah feek. So
but it's not like there's no tashbih though.
Okay, no problem. I don't believe that. No, we don't believe in tashbih.
In ma'na or kayf?
In kayf? Oh, sorry. There's no tashbih in kayf. There's tashbih in ma'na. You're
What is the tashbih in the ma'na then?
Okay. So Allah has a right hand, right? And we understand the right hand is blessed, right? Okay. Now, with the right hand, Allah touches Adam, alayhi his back. Okay?
Sure.
Meaning there's contact between the right hand and Adam, alayhi. Do you agree with that?
Okay, you added a few things here. Contact.
Contact, yes.
How would you translate that in Arabic?
I don't know how contact translate. Okay, I'm saying English. Yeah, contact.
You're adding the cave. You're literally going into the cave. You're saying, oh, he did this contact.
I'm not going.
Then I'm getting an image in my head here.
You're asking me about the qadr mushtaq. So I'm telling you, qadr mushtaq is contact.
Qadr mushtaq is contact. Okay. Sure.
Yeah, okay. Now, with the qadr mushtaq, okay, the kayfiyah is not the same. Okay, now, this is a real event that took place. Do you agree with that?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. So therefore, this is fine, no problem. We affirm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with his right hand touched the back of Adam. No problem. What's the issue?
Yeah, you can affirm that. Yeah,
Okay,
but you
so
can't
that
affirm
means-
tashbih though.
Okay, so that means when you say mumassa, so mumassa refers to so hissi. When you say something is hissi, that means it can be sensible. Okay, so the same way you believe Allah can be seen and Allah can be heard, you must also believe Allah can be touched. So what's the issue with Allah being touched?
No.
With his permission, Bismillah.
You just earlier you rejected that Allah can be touched.
I didn't know. I said Allah can be touched. What are you talking about?
Okay. So what do you mean by Allah being touched? Like a part of him can be touched?
No, so yeah, his essence, like meaning his hand, like Allah can touch you with his hand and you can touch his hand. What's the issue?
So it's like a part of a whole type thing? You can touch a part of it?
Okay, let's say, like, yeah, that's a very bad understanding of mereology. But let's say,
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So this will be a slightly detailed response to the idea of Allah touching the human and then human touching Allah, and how this is kufr if we take it on the literal. So this is Ibn Jawzi rahmatullah alayhi, who's a great scholar, who's even the Salafis will rely on him on other areas. When it comes to his book of Talbis Iblis, they respect that book. They actually use the book in teaching it. So anyhow, this Ibn Jawzi rahmatullah alayhi explaining why this is problematic, why this is likening Allah to humans. So let's go through the details. So it's going to be detailed because I gathered all of the details into from his book into this slideshow. So first thing Ibn Jawzi rahmatullah alayhi he mentions is, he says, He Allah is not in need of acting through a medium, nor is He in need of organs and limbs to take action or act by, since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is independent and not in need of the creation by His essence. Because what he's discussing here is the idea that Allah requires a hand to touch, and so he's negating such a thing. And he's also negating mediums that Allah requires. So he's negating all that. Then he says they did not fully consider that amongst all his creation are composite bodies that face other composite bodies that unite with them and influence their nature, and these created bodies are also able to perform actions towards other creations or influence other things without the need to use other devices and means, but rather touching the body directly. Then he asks, do you men then honestly think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has made acts of persons and composite bodies able to have an effect on other things, on other objects that are distant from them without touching them, while he is somehow in need of doing an act of creation using the medium of clay? Whoever thinks in this contradictory way has already been refuted by Allah's statement, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's statement, where he says, verily the parable of Jesus with God is like the parable of Adam. He created him from dust, then he said be, then it is. So he's saying that Allah doesn't require anything in regards to creating. He can simply say be to it and it becomes. So that's one explanation found on the one particular narration. So the next thing that he says in the next page, this is the translator's note. He says that the point that Ibn Jawzi is making is that Allah has created things that are able to exert influence on other things without touching them. So Allah can exert influence on things without touching them. A case in point is of the squid. So they give an example of a squid which is able to squirt its ink on an opponent and blind it, thus having effect on it without touching it by way of its tentacles. Ibn Jawzi rahmatullahi alayhi point would then be, are we to assume that these creations are better than God? In this case, the squid, as they are able to influence things without touching, while God has to exert some part of his being to affect creation. So then he says, this would of course make God less than his creation, for he would need means, in this case physical touching, not through his will decision, in order to affect things, and his power would be bounded and insufficient. So we can see why this is problematic here. So the next page, Ibn Jawzi, he explains on another narration or elsewhere in the book, he explains, a necessity of the object being faced is for it to be bigger than, smaller, or equal to the thing it is measured against. But this and the like only apply to composite bodies. Everything that can be placed parallel to composite bodies can also touch them. Whatever is subject to physical contact with composite bodies and to being apart from them is finite with the origin. So whatever is going to be touching these things, it's going to be composite. It's going to take up some space. It's going to be finite, and it's going to have an origin. Since it has been established that the proof of the created and non-eternal nature of atoms is their susceptibility to physical contact and dislodgement. So if those in question consider this possible for him, they have declared the possibility of his being non-eternal. So they say that Allah is non-eternal and created. And if they deny the possibility of that for him, then there no longer remains a way for us to establish the fact that atoms are indeed created. So then they can't no longer say atoms are created. If we then presume one who is independent of place and location and another that is in need of location, then we say either they are neighboring or alongside one another, or they are separate from one another. That would be impossible with respect to the Creator, for verily continuity, the attribute of being near, which basically means the attribute of being so near as to be touching, and apartness are among the essential characteristics of occupying space with respect to all physical matter. So then there's a translator note there. He says the rulings that apply to physical matter cannot be applied to God. So that's essentially what Ibn Jawzi rahmatullahi alayhi is summarizing, that what applies to the physical matter or the creation cannot be applied to Allah. Now in the next page, which you shall see He says it has also been established that joining and dispersing are amongst the essential characteristics of occupying space. And the one true God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is not to be described in terms of being space or time. Since if He was subject to space, He would either be motionless in His location that bounded Him or moving away from it. It is also not proper to describe Him in terms of things such as motion, stagnation, joining, or dispersing. Then he says, whoever is alongside and touching or apart has become defined by boundaries. So essentially, you're giving a boundary to Allah. And when one's existence becomes defined by a particular measure, one requires one who gives specification. So then there'll be a requirement of specification that's going to be bounded on this person. Conversely, it should be said that God is neither inside nor outside of the universe, because entering and exiting are among the inescapable properties of things that take up space. So these two states are just as others such as motion, stagnation, and all other coincidental accidents and properties that happen to all physical objects. None of them apply to Allah. So here he's talking about in addition, he's speaking about inside and outside, like in terms of what that entails. But the main part I wanted to highlight was he speaks about the touching here, how this would make God be bound by space and direction and etc. So he talks about the boundaries. In the next page, Ibn Jawzi rahmatullah alayhi, he says, physical contact only occurs between two composite bodies. So we already covered this. I just gathered all of the information here. The one who would follow this position has not left anything to the imagination in likening God to a human body. So he's saying that there's nothing left now, that you have basically likened Allah to a human body. Now the next thing, let's look at what he says. This is the last slide. Ibn Jawzi rahmatullah alayhi, he brings a hadith and then he comments on it. So he says, Salman radiallahu anhu related that the Prophet said, verily when God leavened Adam clay from which he was created and struck with his hands, every good soul came out in his right hand and every foul soul came out in his other hand. Then he shuffled them. Thereafter he brings the living out of the dead and the dead out of the living. Ibn Jawzi says this is incomplete transmitted, so it's mursal. And then he says it has been also established with proof that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not described as touching anything. If it were sound, it would be taken. So he's saying that basically we negate the idea of touching, right? But he goes, even if it, let's say if it was sahih, let's say we did a report that says touching and then we take it and it was sahih, he's saying it would be taken mainly as a similitude to refer to that by which destiny is run. So he's saying that's how it's going to be understood. Qadi Abu Ya'la said the leavening of the clay. So he's refuting the other Hanbali scholars. So Qadi Abu Ya'la, he actually refutes him, and he says the leavening. Abu Ya'la says the leavening of the clay and mixing them some way with other is annexed to the hand by which God created Adam. But it should be known that this is a clear equation between Creator and His creation. So Ibn Jawzi is saying that what Qadi Abu Ya'la is doing here is equating between the Creator and the creation. So yeah, hopefully that's clear why this is problematic, how Ibn Jawzi rahmatullah alayhi has demonstrated this is problematic. And then he's also in this final report he's saying that look, even if it was reliable, the meaning that we're going to now take is not going to be something that's going to be like a literal touching and whatnot. In fact, either the Ahl Sunnah, we either consign the meaning to Allah in terms of such narrations because they're mutashabihat, or we will assign an appropriate meaning, which is a possible meaning. So this is the way of the Ahl Sunnah, and hopefully that's clear in regards to the problem, why this is problematic.